Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. It is exactly 9:48 a.m. And just before we join former Chief Nuclear Officer at Eskom, David Nicholls, I just also want to say that I did suggest that at 10 o'clock we're going to be crossing over to Australia to talk to a brother there about the impact on this new online booking system for Hajj and Umrah. But I'm not sure if that's going to happen because guess what? We are going to be load shed at 10 o'clock. So whether that interview happens or not, we blame it all on Eskom. They are totally to be blamed for this. So, David Nicholls, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
Good morning and welcome to your listeners.
Okay, we do have a generator, but we do know that that's going to take a couple of minutes to kick in, and we're going to be hooking up to someone at the other end of the world. And so whether this actually happens or not is all being blamed on Eskom. Now, you are the former chief nuclear officer at Eskom. We're looking at the fact that South Africa, and I'm not being dramatic here, I hope, but let's hear what you think, that South Africa is on the verge of a catastrophic blackout. It's bringing the country literally to its knees. It does mean businesses going out of business, so to speak, food going to waste because your freezers and fridges are being switched off for such long periods of time. And that also means more and more and more job losses. Where are we at? What on earth is happening at Eskom?
Well, let me split the question into two different discussions. Pardon me. One is the blackout discussion, and one is what it's doing to the economy. The blackout as such, if you understand the Eskom system, the backbone of the system is a 400,000 volt transmission system which links the power stations together. And then customers like cities and things take power from that. A blackout is when that backbone collapses. In other words, when that backbone is de-energized. And the stations are mutually supportive. So if we ended up with, and that's the problem I was worried about, is that when you actually lose, if that backbone collapses, there's no power in the country, and the power stations themselves cannot just start up. They need power to start up. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, there is no more risk of that happening at the moment than there would be if we had no load shedding. Because what load shedding is the national controller taking load away to keep that backbone secure. So yes, we're seeing more and more load shedding because there's less capacity and the demand is not being met. But that shouldn't threaten the actual grid itself. And people
okay,
have had.
so am I being too dramatic, suggesting that the country is being brought to its knees or into a crisis situation?
No. That's a different discussion. You had two discussions there.
Okay.
One is, are we likely to see a complete blackout of the system? And my answer is, it's always possible, but there's no reason to believe it's more likely now than when everything's up and running. And it can be caused by all kinds of things, but we haven't had one in this country for 50 years. And the grid controllers are pretty good people. They know their job. They'll just turn more and more towns off to keep the thing in balance. That's the bad news.
Okay.
Of course, the other question you asked me, Julie, was the economy issue is very simple. Economies are built on energy. And because of decisions made in the 1990s about how they're going to run the system, and that Eskom was not going to be the supplier of last resort, that the free market would supply the power, we've not had spare power in the country since 2007. And what that means is that every large industrialist who asks to build a plant has been told, I'm sorry, you can't have any electrical power supply, or not guaranteed power supply. And if you look at the growth of countries of where we are in the world over the last 20 years compared to ourselves, our economy is probably a quarter to a third less than it should be because of lack of power. And what's happening now is Eskom stations are getting into older and older age, and they've been run very hard for the last 15 years. Basically, if they can work, they've been running, such that their reliability is going down. And so the problem's getting worse and worse, and there's nothing new coming through. And there's much talk of build renewables, but I'll point out to you that you can see in Eskom's load shedding. they are load shedding us in the evening more than in the daytime. And in the evening, solar panels don't do much for you.
Ah.
So your wind and your
Okay.
so putting in more renewables may make more money for individuals, but it won't help the country.
So you did indicate that obviously they haven't built newer power stations, etc., and there's a whole host of reasons for that. But what's happened with Kusile and Medupi? Weren't they supposed to be the new power stations? You also speak about power supply. I am aware of the fact that we have been selling power to our neighboring countries at ridiculously cheap prices. Are we still doing that? Can we afford to do that given what's going down in the country with rolling blackouts?
Well, you've asked two questions, and I'll set to the Medupi-Kasili issue is very simple. When you haven't, building power stations is a complex activity, and you learn by doing it. You can read all the books in the world, but until you do it, you don't learn. And essentially, Eskom went from, in let's say end of 2003, 2004, where Eskom had been told it was not going to ever build another power station. And the departments in Eskom that were to do with project management and engineering had been closed down and demobilized. Eskom went from that situation to within 24 months being on site on the two biggest projects probably in the world on building power stations. And we basically made all the classical mistakes you make were made. And we should have been building years earlier. We should have built a couple of units, as 6 units in Medupi and 6 in Kasili. We should probably have ordered the first 2 units 5 years earlier, and then you learn slowly as you go along. The problem we have with Medupi and Kasili is we'd built most of the components for Medupi for all 12 units before the first machine started up. So the design problems, and life is never fair, the design problems they had in the first machines, they had already built all the components for the last machine. So essentially,
David, let me come in here. Why does Eskom keep reinventing the wheel when all we need to do is to look at other Western countries who have managed to get it right with their power systems, with their power stations, etc., and just copy their their protocol, so to speak? Why do we keep reinventing the wheel? Cost the country billions of lost revenue with all these different shutdowns, rolling blackouts, sabotage, which you're going to talk to us about as well. Is that just sensationalism, that there is in fact no sabotage happening? Putting in every now and again, new CEOs to revive, to bring new life into Eskom. So all of those questions need answering, and we are still as confused as ever before, the general public, obviously.
But I think in some ways we have followed the world practice, and unfortunately that's the problem we're in, because if you look around the world, while our problems are more severe than many countries, the Australian energy market collapsed last week, and the state had to step in and take over the entire system, having privatized it 20 years earlier. And then they've had load restrictions. In the UK, they've had half their distribution companies go bankrupt and be taken over by the state in the last 12 months. California's had load shedding. Not as bad as we are, but they're much richer than we are, and they shouldn't make mistakes. Texas had complete blackouts, as you know, last year. And the Europeans are in one heck of a mess at the moment with their power policy. So I think, unfortunately, we've followed, in my opinion, we've followed the fashionable new wave of how you do power rather than the old one that worked. And it must be borne in mind that in the mid-90s, Eskom was told, you've kept the lights on at the lowest cost in the world for the last 70 years, but we think in the future, the model we're applying won't work. So we're going to change the model and the financial, the market model. So essentially what happened was in the 1990s, the model was changed to the free market, to supply and demand, all those things, which really don't work when your horizon is so far in the future that power plants take 10, 15 years to build and get money back. So the free market doesn't really want to get involved in it. And that was the problem, but it happened across the world. The world had a whole pile of, that's a good, I mean, in terms of changing CEOs and ESCOM restructuring and ESCOM replanning, I can't comment at the moment on us selling power to neighboring states, but the sales are all very small. So it's not that to me is more noise than anything else. And the changing of management teams is, I think, just an indication of the pressure the company's under and the fact that the strategic policy of how you run the grid system, how you run the breaking up of ESCOM into separate companies, all those things are, I think, a rearranging of the deck chairs on the Titanic. It doesn't actually help.
So you don't think that's not necessarily the answer then?
I think it makes it worse.
Doesn't make it worse.
It makes it worse. The classical successful countries have integrated utilities.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example of that if I can very quickly. It's having an arrangement between generation and distribution and transmission in terms of power costs and power in ESCOM is very easy inside one company. You can have an internal, what's called a service level agreement. And it's not legally binding. As soon as you become different companies, your bankers demand you have to have a contract, and the contract can't have any fudges in it. So you get funny problems like if you're running a big power station, you want a guarantee of your tariff for the next 10 years to pay for investment in your plant. But if you're going to do that on the company, then you want that company to be able to do that. Now, transmission is going to find itself having to raise sovereign guarantees to provide guarantees to the bankers of the generation that they're able to pay the bill. So there's all kinds of things haven't been thought through. And I think we were here in 2000. We tried the same thing. Didn't work. California's collapse showed us that. I don't think that this is going to work its way through. And I worry that it'll be pushed through political reasons because we've said we'll do it, so we'll do it.
Right.
But I'm not sure it'll actually help that much.
Okay. We're going to have to wrap up in a minute or two. It's already 10 o'clock before we go off. Let me ask you very, very quickly. If you can simplify and summarize what we've talked about, are we in serious trouble or not? Are we going to be able to get our heads above the water? And is this the whole issue around rolling blackouts, stage 6, etc., going to be a thing of the past sooner rather than later? Or are we still in troubled waters for yet some time to come?
Very simply, for any organization, you need 3 plans. You need a plan of where you're going to be in the future, in the long term. You need a plan of how to survive as you are now, and a transition plan to go from where you are now to the future. Those 3 plans in turn, the longer term plan, I still do not see from government or from ESCOM a plan of how we intend to meet our energy demands in a carbon constrained world in the longer term. And we should now be building large projects, large power stations to get us out of the hole. But that'll take 10 years to work through. Be it coal, be it nuclear, be it gas, we should be doing those things now. We're just still talking about them. The second one is a short-term plan of how to fix the problem at the moment. And that is not showing any great signs of success in ESCOM. But essentially, you've just got to get the power stations more reliable. You've got a stronger management. You've got and I don't know quite how you do it, but you have a plan to actually do what was achieved in 2016, 17 when we improved availability. Get the availability of the fleet up. And then you've got to have a coherent transition plan to transition from where we are now to this future you've determined. And I just worry that we're seeing everyone talk about the transition, but how can you have a transition when you don't know what you're doing at the moment and you don't know where you're going?
All right. Finally, we're hearing about these wild cat strikes at ESCOM. We're also hearing about sabotage. We're hearing about fraud. We're hearing about all sorts of shady things going on behind the scenes, behind closed doors at ESCOM. Is that also part of the reason why we're sitting in the current situation that we're in? Total rolling blackouts, just the chaos we find ourselves in?
I don't think they're the prime root cause. I think the root cause of those things is morale in the company. And I think that's a major problem. I can imagine, I've been at Escom now for three and a half years, so I'm longer, but I can imagine that the company has a major morale problem. They're being told they're a failure by their own bosses. I haven't seen any indications. There's some indications of some degree of sabotage, but not very much in terms of the big picture. So I don't think those are the dominant issues. They're good excuses to explain why it's going wrong, but essentially there's not enough capacity in the system because we haven't built plant in time.
Okay, and the reason I asked that question, David, is because there's an email doing the rounds suggesting all of what I've just outlined to you now. Large-scale corruption, sabotage. When the coal gets delivered, there's all sorts of rubbish in the coal to just come up to the type of to the weight, the expected weight. But the coal is of a very, very poor quality because it's been filled with a lot of junk, and all of those type of situations. So you're saying to small scale, not a large scale as people are making it to be.
I think look, I can't speak of details because I'm not close to it, but my limited experience is that yes, it's a challenge. But it isn't the root cause. It sounds, it's like when someone talks about someone as being corrupt to the point of 20 million rand. I'm just inventing a number here, and they say, "Oh, that's the problem in Eskom." Eskom is a 200+ billion rand a year company. The corruption. I can't speak, but again, if you back at what happened with the State Capture Commission. In fact, in the Eskom discussion, there was a discussion about Eskom breaching its processes, and we can debate that. But in reality, nobody actually found the smoking gun.
We don't have time for all of that. I'd like to get you back on air next week, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
Just very quickly, and excuse the pun, do we see or can we expect to see a light at the end of the tunnel?
My answer, not at the moment.
Ooh.
I don't yet see that. I don't see that long-term plan that says this is how we in 10 years' time we'll be out of it. And the problem we're facing now is in terms of our dispatchable baseload plant, Eskom's coal fleet is dying of old age and overuse.
We have to talk again. We absolutely have to pick up on this discussion. Sorry, we've run out of time. Lovely talking with you. Keep warm and God bless.
And yourself. God bless.
Okay, it is 10:06. I think we're going to be, the lights are going out in a minute or two here. Thank you for being with us right here on News and Views, on Salam Media, obviously. Thank you to the production team. From me, next week, Monday, stay safe, keep warm. Inayat Wadi will be keeping you company tomorrow and Friday. Assalamu alaikum and Khuda Hafiz from me, Julie Ali. So